Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the Speaker for allowing me to speak tonight. I'm back again to talk about issues that are important, I think, to this House. They're important to the American people, and they're especially important to the concept of leadership in this House of Representatives and just where it's going to go. Now, I want to go back for a moment before we go into current events and talk about some past events. When the Democratic majority took over the House of Representatives, and in the lead up prior to that time when we were having these speeches made by the presumed new Speaker of the House, Ms. Pelosi, about what we could expect from the new Congress. Now, this is not the first time I've mentioned this, but let's remind you again, to all the members of this House. This is a quote from Nancy Pelosi in 2006. The American people voted to restore integrity and honesty in Washington, D.C. And the Democrats intend to lead the most honest, the most open, and most ethical Congress in history. Now, this was the goal that was set up by the Speaker of the House, and she has now been serving the Speaker of the House for 2 terms. And this was her mantra of what this House would stand for. And without getting off into the weeds of the internal politics of Rules Committee and stuff like that, which bores people to tears, I'm just talking about this honest, ethical, and open about it Congress that we were promised. And in another speech, the Speaker of the House, the then presumed Speaker of the House, made the statement that what she was going to do was if the Democrats got to be in charge of this House, they were going to drain the swamp. That there was this culture of corruption that had created a swamp, and that they were going to drain the swamp and expose the corruption. And they were going to expose the misdeeds. Now, I'm not here to tell you that there weren't misdeeds that were brought forward. I'm not sure the Democrats had anything to do with exposing them, but they certainly came out through the process at that period of time. And people went to prison, and rightfully so. They broke the law. But I will say that the leadership at that time went forward with those efforts, and they reached the unfortunate conclusion that several people went to prison. Several people had to leave the Congress. But that doesn't mean because they found issues in the Republican Party that those were the only issues that were here. And for the last 6 or 8 weeks, I've been trying to say, who's going to look at these other issues? I'm not accusing anybody. I'm saying accusations are being made by the press. Accusations are being made by other people, and they seem to fall on deaf ears. They seem to fall on the deaf ears of the leadership of the Democratic majority in this Congress, and they seem to fall upon the deaf ears of the so-called Ethics Committee, whose job is to look into these things. And so we keep raising these issues, wondering what's going on. But now I have even more concerns. And these concerns are things that I think everybody's going to be concerned about. Because if you woke up on Sunday morning and you turned on the television, you saw that people are storming the streets of Iran and people are getting killed because of an election. And that's a pressure point now in our world that is as big a pressure point as Afghanistan or Iraq or any other place, because it has the potential that nuclear weapons could be involved. Because we don't know exactly where Iran is on their development of their nuclear weapons, but we certainly know they're working on it. And they make no bones about it. So we've got a possible nuclear power there where there is a turmoil going on, and we're sort of sitting here over here being quiet about it, and maybe that's the right thing to do. That seems to be the president's taking a position of kind of hands off, and there certainly is a school that believes that's the right thing to do, and I'm not criticizing that. But I am saying that that's a thing that every American, and certainly every member of this body, should be concerned about. Because it could be a world-changing event that comes out of Iran. And it could be a world-changing event for the negative. So why do I raise this? Well, that very same day, we heard more from our longtime adversary, the North Koreans. You know, I'm ashamed to have to say this, but I'm old enough to remember the end of the Korean War. I was just a little kid, but I do remember it. And we never made peace with the North Koreans. We made an armistice. We decided that we would time out, no more war. And they went on their side of the 38th parallel, and the South Koreans went on our side of the 38th parallel. And since that time, one of the great miraculous transformations of an area has taken place in South Korea. And now when you visit South Korea, it's a prosperous nation. It has a functioning democratic government. And the South Koreans just have a lot of bragging rights, a lot to be proud of. Meanwhile, the North Koreans stayed in their same Soviet socialist type republic, a communist regime, and basically, with the exception of building a gigantic army, they have accomplished nothing since 1954 or 56, and except to stir up a lot of trouble in that area and to develop nuclear weapons and a missile system. Now, there's some that think that the North Koreans are just in this business to sell these weapons to other people, to give them something that they can trade, because they basically are practically without trade resources. But others like me and others fear that the North Koreans are just unstable enough that they can use the weapons in this army to kick open the door to the Second Korean War, or worse, a regional war. And so they've done some things that in the past would have created havoc in countries. I mean, they fired missiles in the direction of Japan 2 or 3 times, and shot a couple of them over Japan. Now here's a sovereign nation having a missile fired over their territory. They don't know what that missile is carrying or what it could do to their country if it came down. That's as close to an aggressive act, I think, as you can get without hitting somebody. And now they have announced to us specifically, and to the world in general, they're going to test one of their longer range missiles by firing it at Hawaii. Hawaii, a state in this union. They could just as well be firing it at Idaho, or Texas, or California, or Alaska, or Georgia, or Maine. A sovereign state of this nation they told us they're going to fire a missile in that direction, basically at that state. Now they're pompous and blowhards, but we don't know what they're really going to do. And we do know that they have tested nuclear weapons very recently. So they have nuclear capability. Now, why do I bring these things up in relationship to the atmosphere that's been created in this House by the failure of leadership to address issues that is part of draining the swamp? It's because I'm going to make the argument that what has gone on in this House in the conversation between our Speaker and the CIA about who's telling the truth and who's not has a direct influence on these 2 Sunday morning news stories and others. Because, yes, we folks sitting around the breakfast table, we get our information about what's going on in the world from the press. But you better hope, and having been a trial judge and told juries this for 20 years, you better hope that somebody's getting better information than there is in the press. And no offense to the press, but let's face it, they get it wrong every once in a while. And what we depend on is an intelligence system that doesn't get it wrong. We depend on an intelligence system that when they come to us and say, this is what our intelligence tells us, we feel like that's fairly reliable news that we can depend on. We can't disclose it because it's top secret, but we can depend upon our intelligence professionals to come forward to give us information. Now, we've had this issue about enhanced interrogation of prisoners. That's been an issue ongoing now throughout the election, and now that the Democrats are in charge, it continues to be that we are a torturing nation. And some people label this as torture, and some people label it as enhanced interrogation. Whatever you call it, there was an issue as to whether or not the members of the Intelligence Committee of this House were informed about this when they started to do it. Now, those members that have had the opportunity to speak have indicated that which was not top secret, that there were briefings on this issue. The Speaker of the House has said they're lying. I was never told about these enhanced interrogations. And she has repeated that until she realized, which we pointed out on the floor of the House, the lying to the United States Congress is a crime. And here's the statute. Could I have a glass of water, young lady? Except as otherwise provided in this section, whoever in any manner within the jurisdiction of the executive, legislative, or judicial branches of the government of the United States knowingly and willfully falsifies, conceals, or covers up by any trick, scheme, or device a material fact, makes any material false, fictitious, fraudulent statement or representation, or makes or uses any false writing or document knowing the same to contain materially false or fictitious, fraudulent statements or entry, shall be fined under this title, imprisoned not more than 5 years if the offense involves international or domestic terrorism, as defined in Section 2331, imprisoned not more than 8 years or both if the matter relates to an offense under Chapter 1009A, B, 1010, 1017 of Section 1591, then the term of imprisonment imposed under this section shall be not more than 8 years. Without going off into what's in these other sections, what this says under our criminal law of the federal government, that if you're lying to anybody lying about a material fact, then that can be nothing more material than the functions of our intelligence committee and our intelligence community and their relationship and whether or not something happened. And to accuse them of being unreliable and lying is accusing them of a crime. She is, by this accusation, by saying they didn't tell the truth, they never briefed me, she is accusing those people who did that, made that statement that we briefed, of committing a crime. It may be a crime that only puts you in prison for 5 years and gives you a fine. Or it could carry over to whatever these sections pertain to carry it all the way up to 8 years. Or it could be as little as, what was the lowest, 4 years? 5 years, I guess 5. Whatever it is, whatever the time, that incarceration for that period of time is serious incarceration. This is a serious accusation. These are serious contentions by the Speaker when she says they didn't do that. They're lying. They're lying to you. They're lying to the Congress. They're lying to the press if they talk to the press. But most importantly, they're lying to the Congress. Now, that's an issue that we should be concerned about, because not just that we need it resolved, and that's what I keep raising. I've been a judge in this country for 20 years, and its purpose is to resolve issues. Now, my question is, who's going to resolve this issue? This issue needs to be resolved. Now, why does it need to be resolved? I gave you two examples: North Korea and Iran. Two hot spots boiling up. We're getting information. We should be, I assume we are getting information from our intelligence community. If they are liars, can we trust them? Can we put the security of Hawaii on the shoulders of our intelligence community and trust their report as to whether or not there is a nuclear warhead on that missile that they have said they're going to fire at Hawaii? Can we, under the Speaker's accusations, trust this community? Now, that's the question that I think we ought to be talking to ourselves about. And then once again, the 50th time I've probably said this in the last 6 weeks, what I'm asking for is a place, someone to resolve these issues. And I've raised this resolution necessity. The Speaker is the leader. She's the leader of this House. She needs to resolve this issue. This is putting a crimp in our intelligence community. It's making if I'm an agent and I'm reporting and I get accused of lying, I'm faced criminal prosecution. And intelligence at its best is like every other human endeavor. It has its flaws. So, once again, failure to show the leadership that it takes to resolve issues causes consequences we can't imagine until they look us in the face. And that's what I wanted to talk about here tonight. We've talked about the issues with Mr. Rangel and the Rangel Rule. We've talked issues about other members of this Congress, Ms. Waters, Mollahan, Murtha, Vysotsky, all these guys. I've talked about those issues, and each one of them I said, I don't know whether these accusations are true or not, but somebody needs to resolve them. If we're draining the swamp, somebody needs to resolve those issues. If there's a lie going on to Congress and we're draining the swamp, somebody needs to drain that part of the swamp that has to do with this lie. That's what this is about. That's all I'm trying to do. I'm raising the question for you, members of this House, and for the American public to think about. What about this culture of corruption? It obviously seems to be here. What about this issue of lying? It needs to be resolved. The security of our nation is at stake. I'm not here by myself, and I've been talking way too long without recognizing a really good friend who's come down here to just have a friendly visit about some of these issues that are unresolved. My friend Phil Gingrey from Georgia, one of my classmates and a good, close personal friend. Now, whatever time you may wish to consume.
Well, Judge Carter, I appreciate, Madam Speaker. Well, Judge Carter, I appreciate, Madam Speaker, I appreciate the gentleman from Texas, Judge Carter, yielding to me. And as the gentleman points out, this is a very, very serious time to be on the floor, speaking to all of our colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and Representative Carter and myself, and others on our side of the aisle, as we bring these concerns to our fellow members, Madam Speaker. It's not something that we do lightly. It is not something we do lightly, and I hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle understand that. We've all grown up with the little sayings, aphorisms, or adages that you hear from your parents, or maybe at school or in church. If you things like, I appreciate the gentleman from Texas, Judge Carter, yielding to me. And as the gentleman points out, this is a very, very serious time to be on the floor, speaking to all of our colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and Representative Carter and myself, and others on our side of the aisle, as we bring these concerns to our fellow members, Madam Speaker. it's not something that we do lightly. It is not something we do lightly, and I hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle understand that. We've all grown up with the little sayings, the aphorisms or adages that you hear from your parents, or maybe at school or in church. Things like, if you live in a glass house, you shouldn't throw rocks. I remember my dad told me one time a story about Huey Long, governor of Louisiana. And I don't know whether it was in a re-election campaign or maybe even his first campaign for governor. He had a critic, maybe even an opponent in that race, General Hugh Johnson. And General Hugh Johnson was awfully critical of Governor Huey Long and accused him of corruption and that sort of thing. And Huey Long said to General Hugh Johnson something to the effect that don't criticize a speck in my eye if you have a plank in your own. In fact, Madam Speaker, that may be in Proverbs in the Bible somewhere as well. Maybe that's where Governor Huey Long got that from. But the point is, you're reluctant, aren't we? We are reluctant to bring criticism against our colleagues, knowing that we're not perfect. Nobody, indeed, is, except the one true Savior. And so it's a very serious thing when we come and express concern on the House floor about the action of our colleagues. But yet we're here tonight. We're obviously here tonight, and we're speaking about that. And Judge Carter, Madam Speaker, started off talking about the seriousness of the consequences of our integrity or lack of integrity, as he talked about what happened years ago, and I remember it too because we're about the same age in regard to the Korean conflict, and then brought us into current time and talked about what's going on in North Korea now, what's going on in Iran, that the intelligence that we receive about things that are really bad things that are occurring across the globe has got to be wisdom, and it's got to be honest. And you can't modify those two terms and say it's conventional wisdom or it's relative honesty. Wisdom and honesty don't have modifiers. It's either wisdom or it's not. It's either honest or truthful or it's not. And so as Judge Carter talks about this situation with our distinguished Speaker of the House of Representatives in regard to whether or not what she said about the CIA was honest and truthful, or whether the CIA was honest and truthful in regard to their response. In fact, John Podesta, I think, basically said, look, the CIA spoke the truth. It is the consequences, Madam Speaker, are so serious to this nation and indeed to the world that it is important. If you ask any citizen of this country and you said, who do you think you depend on most to tell the truth? Would it be the Speaker of the House or the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency? I'm not sure how most people would respond, Madam Speaker. I'm not sure how I would respond. You expect both of them at that level of government to be honest and truthful. So it is disturbing to me as a member of the House of Representatives. It's disturbing to me as a citizen of this country, as a dad, as a granddad, as a husband, as a father, to find out that maybe the Central Intelligence Agency is not telling the truth. And even worse than that, Madam Speaker, that possibly that there's a pattern of the Central Intelligence Agency not telling the truth. That is just about as frightening a concept as you can possibly imagine. What can we rely on? Should we have done what we did, an Operation Enduring Freedom, in regard to taking out al-Qaeda and the Taliban and that regime change back in 2001, 2002, before Representative Carter and I became members of the Congress? It's a very, very disturbing thing, and that's why we're here tonight. And again, it is painful. But I'm not standing up here, Madam Speaker, I'm not standing up here saying that our Speaker, the Speaker, the first female Speaker in the history of this body, who is now serving in her third year as Speaker of the House of Representatives, I'm not saying that she was dishonest. I just simply am here to say we need to know. The American people need to know. And if the CIA lied once even, but certainly if there was a pattern of giving misleading information to members of the select committees on intelligence, then we've got some serious problems, Madam Speaker. We have some serious problems, and something needs to be done about that, and it needs to be done right now, because as Judge Carter was saying, these things that are going on in Iran, in North Korea, and other parts of the world, this can't wait. If we got a problem, we need to solve this right now. So that's why we're here tonight. I appreciate my colleague from Texas for doing this gutsy thing, because he's not perfect, Madam Speaker, and I'm not perfect. And again, I may have a little speck in my eye, and the house I live in may have too much glass in it. But on the other hand, if we see things, and I'm again not suggesting anybody, certainly not suggesting that our Speaker, the Speaker, was lying. But if there's a problem, it needs to be brought forward for the betterment of this body. And we owe that to the American people. We owe that to the American people. We have unfortunately, Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, it seems that our House Committee on Standards of Official Conduct, the Ethics Committee, it's been dysfunctional since the day I came here 7 years ago. I'm in my fourth term, Mr. Speaker, and that body has been dysfunctional since the day I came here. It's supposed to be a bipartisan. You have 5 members of each party, and yet we seem to be just sweeping things under the rug and not addressing problems like we should. And I'm going to yield back to the gentleman that controls the time here in just a second. But the point is just exactly what he said at the outset, Mr. Speaker. I remember it so painfully well, because back in 2006, when we Republicans still were in the majority, every day, every evening during special order hours, the then minority party, the Democrats, just pounded over and over again of what they called a culture of corruption. And we did, on our side of the aisle, Mr. Speaker, have a few members, thank God not many, but 3 or 4, that is too many, of course, 1 is too many, that were not conducting themselves in the manner that this House demands, that the sanctity of this House demands, and by campaigning on that, and along with, of course, the unpopularity of a prolonged conflict in Iraq, and too much spending, absolutely too much spending, but of course it seems like a penny ante compared to what's going on now. But, you know, it caused us to lose our majority status, Mr. Speaker, and it's painful. It's painful to find ourselves in this situation and to think that, Madam Speaker, and the Democratic minority at the time talked about, man, ladies and gentlemen of the United States, you give us an opportunity, you let us control, and we will drain the swamp. We will end this culture of corruption. And here again, I am mighty disappointed. We're not seeing any end to the culture of corruption, and it seems like more and more is being swept under the rug, and it shouldn't happen on either side of the aisle. And so that's why we're here. That's why, again, it's painful, and we're not trying to hurt anybody. We're just trying to help the American people. And I yield back to my colleague from Texas.
And I thank my friend. Let me say first, I'm being no biblical scholar, but that's from the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus talks about, don't try to get the cinder out of your neighbor's eye before you take the plank out of your eye. And that's fine. But I know that somebody thinks most everybody thinks this is a very contentious place. And so when people start talking about these things, they think, oh, it's that same old stuff. I want you to know that the announced date of the firing of that rocket by North Korea is Independence Day, July the 4th. That's the day they said they're going to shoot a rocket at Hawaii. Now, I'm assuming that the White House and the Select Committee on the House and Senate on Intelligence are very, very interested in knowing accurate information about what's going to be on the nose of that rocket when it's fired. Because, quite frankly, if you want to restart the Korean War, how spectacular could it be that they'll have an armed missile fired at one of our states and then invade across the 38th parallel? It could be disastrous. Now, that's not my imagination working. It's happened before. I mean, the invasion took place. That's what started the Korean War. They've got one of the largest armies in the world. They're saying that they have canceled the armistice. Now, under technical rules of war, canceling an armistice reinstates the war. We're not treating it that way because regular rules of war kind of have changed, not by what's written in the books, but by usage. So we never really call it a war. We call it a conflict and so forth, like we've done in so many other things we do. But the reality is they said the armistice is off, which means we should be back technically back fighting. They said they're going to fire a missile on our Independence Day, the 4th of July. Now, why do I bring that up? Because by my watch, this is the 23rd day of June. We've got to be able to trust our intelligence committee and our intelligence community in what? That's next 10 days. In the next 10 days, we got to be able to have the confidence in them. And we've already got the third person in line for the presidency of the United States telling this body that the intelligence community lied about what they said about briefing. Now, you know what? I'll even give you the way it can be handled. I mean, this place is full of things that goes on that are very confusing. It could be I made a mistake. I didn't understand the briefing. Yeah, I heard it, but I didn't realize what it was saying. There's lots of things to be said, but to sit here with this what they're it's trying to just go away. The press isn't talking about it anymore, so it'll just go away. But it's not going to go away if on the 4th of July and the missile's on its way, we have a decision to make. Do we take it down, shoot down that missile as it heads towards Hawaii, which it probably can't get there, but if it can, do we shoot it down, or do we let it fall in the ocean and take our chances, or do we let it fall on one of the islands in Hawaii and take our chances, or what are we going to do? Intelligence community, how safe do you think that launch is? They give us a fact. Now, the meeting's behind closed doors and somebody says, well, yeah, they tell us it's got a nuclear warhead on it, but, they lied to Pelosi. Are they lying to us? Do we want that? Is that good governance of this country? There's a lot of, and the reason that you have to raise this issue is because there's so much politics that's involved in all this. It's all about politics as well as what really happened. And at this point, with somebody announcing on the 4th of July they're firing a long-range missile, you got to put politics aside at that point in time and say, trust the community. They don't lie. Because they're who's going to tell us what's happening with that missile. That's my whole thinking of this deal. And the truth is, what I've been trying to talk about since day one of this conversation I've had when I brought up the Wrangle Rule and all these other things is that if we as members of this House have questions that we think need to be resolved, we have only one place to go, and that's to our colleagues in this House and say, these issues need to be resolved. If there's nothing to them, we need to find out there's nothing to them. But they need to be resolved. And if you're draining the swamp, that means you're going to address issues as they come up. If something stinks over in this part of the swamp, you drain that swamp, find out what's stinking. That's what she meant when she said draining the swamp. Now we pointed out parts of the swamp which our colleagues on the other side seem to be dwelling in right now. By accusation only. By press accusation. Let's clear those people's names. If that swamp if there's nothing in that swamp, let's drain it. Let's find out. And that's the responsibility of the leadership of the majority, and that's the responsibility of the Ethics Committee. And that's why we keep talking about those ethical issues. And unfortunately, there may be more. We have to be prepared to do what we promised the American people. And the first thing we need to address is this issue of whether or not the community was lying to the American people. I see we are joined by my good friend and loyal stalwart who always shows up when he sees me all by myself with Phil on the floor. My friend Steve King from Iowa. I'll yield you whatever time you'd like to have.
I thank the judge from Texas.
Whatever time you'd like to have.
I thank the judge from Texas for yielding and I thank the judge from Texas for yielding and for also organizing this special order, and the gentleman doctor from Georgia as well, who has been persistent and relentless here, standing up for truth, justice, and the American way, and fiscal responsibility, constitutionality. And as I'm reading the Washington Post language, the statement that came from our Speaker November 8th of 2006, the American people voted to restore integrity and honesty in Washington, D.C., and the Democrats intend to lead the most honest, the most ethical, and the most perhaps moral Congress in history. And the most honest, most open, and most ethical Congress in history, close quote, is that language. And I heard that constant drub of criticism that was coming here for several years. The 30s group came down here to the floor almost every night and made those kind of allegations. And I was looking at people over on this side of the aisle that were clearly committed to this cause, and people that I would trust with everything I have, working hard, struggling to represent the American people. They took that kind of criticism, and some of the American people bought that kind of promise. But today they know different. Today they know this Congress doesn't meet that standard. The other statement here, the National Public Radio, under strong attack from Republicans, House Speaker Pelosi accused the CIA and Bush administration of misleading her about waterboarding detainees in the war on terrorism, close quote. And again, they mislead us all the time. I was fighting the war in Iraq at that point too, close quote. Not really, Mr. Speaker. Here's what I remember. I remember when Speaker Pelosi grasped the gavel up here in January of 2007. And from that point in that Congress, she led at least 45 votes here on the floor of the House of Representatives that were designed to either unfund, underfund, or undermine our troops. And that's all a matter of record. It's all in a spreadsheet in my office, and I can lay it all into this congressional record. And actually, I probably put it all into the congressional record at one point or another. But this isn't fighting the war in Iraq. She was fighting against the war in Iraq, and the goal was to get our troops out of there, declare defeat, and bring disgrace down upon the Bush administration for whatever that motive might be. But it was clear in the rhetoric that came that it wasn't in support of victory in Iraq, but every move, all 45 votes, as a matter of congressional record, undermined our troops. And yet, President Bush issued the surge order, and the surge strategy has clearly been a success. Traveled to Iraq with a gentleman from Texas, and I recall some real hot days over there. And I can remember that there was a time when we couldn't go to places like Ramadi or Fallujah because they were too dangerous. And I can remember coming back 6 months later and going shopping in Ramadi. And I can remember coming back a little later and meeting with the mayor of Fallujah, who declared Fallujah to be a city of peace. This all happened because of the nobility and the sacrifice and the courage and the bravery and the dedication of our U.S. military. And you cannot talk about our military without talking about the Commander-in-Chief. And it's President Bush who gave the order. And now we've reached this point where we have achieved, as a nation, a definable victory in Iraq. And it's definable in a lot of ways. But it wasn't because of this quote that we're reading here about the Speaker fighting the war in Iraq at that point, too, you know. No, she was fighting against it here on this floor, and it's a matter of record, and that point can't be allowed to pass. And so what has been achieved is a definable victory that's there. The ethno-sectarian deaths have dropped 98% from their top. The civilian deaths have dropped 90%. Our American casualties there over the last year, and my data will be brought up to date on the 30th of this month, but as the last day of June last year, and as pray to God that we don't have any more casualties there for all time, but the roughly accidental deaths in Iraq to Americans are roughly equivalent to those deaths that are hostile deaths, categorized as hostile death. Now, that is a very good statistic if you're looking at war zone statistics. If you're at as great a risk from getting killed in a rollover of your Humvee as you are by the enemy, there's been a lot of progress that's made there. A lot of progress made in the local governments with free elections. They've had a number of free elections and ratified a constitution. The last election they had was at least as peaceful as our last election, and probably at least as legitimate as our last election as well. I think there's a lot to be celebrated in Iraq and the Middle East. And I didn't mean to divert from the subject matter, but I think we should raise up to the CIA subject and ask, what about the national security of the United States of America when the Speaker of the House declares those who are briefing her up in the secure room on the 4th floor to be a group of felonious liars that have continually, according to her, lied to and misled the Congress of the United States of America and lied to the Speaker of the House? And why would the Speaker go back up and be briefed again by people that she declared to be liars? And how could anyone separate the CIA from the other 14 members of the intelligence community? Would anyone actually go brief the Speaker after they've been declared to be a liar, summarily declared to be a liar, with no evidence, with no proof, simply an allegation? Now, in this country, if you believe that someone is not telling the truth, you don't raise that subject. You just accept what they say without challenging them unless you can prove the wrong. That's the way it is in a Western civilization, in Western Christendom, as Winston Churchill declared Western civilization. And I believe it's rooted in the book of John when Christ stood before the high priest Caiaphas. And Caiaphas said, "Did you really do those things? Did you really preach these things?" And Jesus said, "Well, ask them. They were there. This all happened openly." And the guard struck Jesus for his insolent answer, supposedly. And Jesus said, "Well, if I speak wrongly, then you must prove the wrong. But if I speak rightly, why do you strike me?" If someone speaks wrongly, the one who challenges their integrity has a responsibility to prove the wrong. Jesus said that to the high priest. At least we could do is ask the same standard of our Speaker to prove the wrong of the CIA. And this will not go away. We cannot tolerate a situation where there's a mistrust between the highest levels of intelligence gathering services in the United States of America that gather the intelligence information that direct our military, our overt and our covert operations, and that go in and preempt terrorist strikes against Americans and other free people in the world, and to have them intimidated by an allegation of telling a lie, which would be a felony, and there's a specific section in the code punishable by 8 years in a federal penitentiary, if a member of the intelligence community should lie to the United States Congress. And there it is, Title 18 U.S. Code 1001. 8 years in the penitentiary for that. It's very specific. So this has got to stop. It's got to be resolved. And this Congress has got to bring it to a head. And I appreciate the gentleman from Texas for having this special order and raising these issues, and an opportunity to echo this out across the American people. And I'd be happy to yield back to the judge.
I thank you. I thank my friend. And I'll now recognize my friend again from Georgia. He seems like he has something he wants to say.
Well,
Mr. Gingrey.
Mr. Speaker, of course, I appreciate the gentleman yielding, and once again, I appreciate him having the courage, as well as the courage of my colleague from Iowa, Representative Steve King, to come to the floor and to talk about issues like this. It's and as I said earlier in my remarks, it's very painful, very hard to do, but it's something that has to be done. If the CIA, as I said before, if they're lying to someone who's third in line to the President, the Speaker of the House, and there's a pattern of that lying, we've got some serious problems. And it would seem to me that something of this magnitude would rise to the level of a Iran-Contra issue, or indeed a Watergate issue. Where you absolutely have to know who's lying, who knew what and when, and who's telling the truth and who's not telling the truth. And we all know the consequences of those actions. And, you know, again, I'm not suggesting, Mr. Speaker, that our Speaker, the Speaker, has lied. I just, in my earlier remarks this evening, I misstated something. I said John Podesta. John Podesta was not the director of the CIA. That's Leon Panetta. So we all have senior moments. I'm maybe a little older than the Speaker. I certainly look older. She's a very, very attractive Speaker, as we all know. But she could have had a senior moment in regard to this. And Mr. Speaker, my colleagues, don't you know that after this happened and she said that, don't you know that there was a meeting of the powers that be with the Speaker and with the CIA, with the director of the CIA, and information was presented which would have shown that she either misspoke or didn't misspeak, and if she misspoke, how simple, Mr. Speaker, how simple it would have been to just say, ladies and gentlemen, not of the Congress, not of the House of Representatives, more importantly, ladies and gentlemen of the country, I was wrong about that. I didn't deliberately lie. I was just wrong about that. I didn't remember that briefing. Or the opposite. The CIA was wrong and didn't inform. And that puts the issue to rest. That, Mr. Speaker, that's all our minority leader, the gentleman from Ohio, John Boehner, the respected leader of the Republican House Conference. That's all he said that should be done. Let's get to the bottom of this thing, put it to rest, and tell the truth. The truth will always serve you well, and the truth is not painful. So,
reclaiming my time.
My feeling. And
I don't want to keep belaboring this issue, but I think somebody ought to be thinking of keep belaboring this issue. But I think somebody ought to be thinking about it before they light the first firecracker on the 4th of July. That we have a country that has basically said, as far as they're concerned, they're back at war with us, telling us they're going to fire a missile at one of our 50 states, and they're going to do it on the 4th of July. Now, let's assume that we're going to get some intelligence on that. Let's start off with them saying, doesn't carry a warhead, let it go forward. And then the man that's going to have to make the decision is going to be the President of the United States. This is not a decision you do by committee. That's why we have an executive branch. He will collect that data, and then the question is, do we shoot it down We're pretty sure it doesn't carry a nuclear missile, but somewhere in the back of his mind he says, wait a minute. They lied to Nancy Pelosi. How do I know they haven't done their work and they're telling me this to feel good about it? Maybe there is a missile on board. Or he thinks, I don't know what to do because I don't know whether I can trust my intelligence. But he knows that the firing of our missile, which, by the way, according to my friend Trent Frank, we got missiles that can take this thing down. So let's assume we execute one of those and we bring it down, and the North Koreans say, that's it, act of war, and here they come swarming across the 38th parallel into South Korea. And they're marching that 80 miles to Seoul. And we get accused of starting a war. Or, worst case scenario, say, well, we can't trust the intelligence, don't shoot it down. And it hits the big island of Hawaii and goes boom. And now we're in it, and it's nuclear. Or maybe less than nuclear. Who knows? The point of this conversation is intelligence matters.
If the gentleman would yield for just a second.
yield.
And I thank the gentleman. We were just before the Rules Committee, Mr. Speaker, submitting an amendment to the Defense Authorization Act of 2000.
Doing a great deal about what happens to the indecision when you don't trust your intelligence community because of an allegation that's made by the person that's third in line for the President of the United States. This isn't somebody sitting on a street corner somewhere. This is the person third in line for President of the United States. The indecision that could come because of the doubt that's been planted, and every day that goes by there's more doubt because it's not resolved. Let me submit another way that this hurts America's security. Beyond this point that you have made, Judge, about the indecision that could result in allowing a missile to land and hit the United States, or to do an early strike because we don't really know. But here's another scenario. This cloud has been cast over the intelligence community, and it echoes over the top of our entire defense network that's there. And there are people in this Capitol that work to please the Speaker, and many of them are staff. And these are staff that are on committee. They're the Speaker's staff. They're in position to write these bills in the middle of the night. They get dropped on us about the time that the rooster crows in the morning, and then we're to figure out what's in them and what's not in them on a closed rule or a modified closed rule, and the Rules Committee deciding the debate now is in the Rules Committee. And so we don't even get a debate here on the floor on the $1.2 billion, an opportunity to put people on record and we may not, I think we probably will not at least get that vote, but to put people on record and find out what this Congress thinks, the collective wisdom of the American people is to be reflected here. And we can see the funding for the defense intelligence all the way across the board systematically and summarily undermined and reduced by staff people who are protected because we can't even offer the amendments here on the floor, who are seeking to please the Speaker because she's made a comment into the record. And how do you fix that lack of trust? It undermines the resources, I believe, going to the intelligence community that's there, and it causes others to look more critically upon the intelligence group altogether with the CIA and others, which undermines the support of the public, undermines the support of Congress, and undermines the resources that they will have to use. And if we have people out there whose lives are on the line every day, and we do, they've got to be questioning themselves as, why do they do this? Do they really want to put themselves up for this kind of scrutiny, this kind of allegation? And if I were Leon Panetta, and I were seeking to send somebody up here to brief the Speaker, I don't think you'd ask for volunteers because I don't think you would get any. I think that has to be a direct order from the director of the CIA. You like your job, brief the Speaker. You might have it when you're done. I yield back.
10, our National Defense Authorization Act, something like $525 billion. But $1.2 billion, as the gentleman from Texas was alluding to, was cut from the missile defense program. It was cut from the missile defense program at a time when Kim Jong-il is firing missiles and testing nuclear weapons, violating the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And our intelligence is telling us, as the gentleman from Texas just said, that these ballistic missiles that they're testing could reach Hawaii. Well, we're getting that information, Mr. Speaker, not necessarily from the CIA, but from all of our intelligence agencies. Heck, there's 16 of them, and most of them are within the Department of Defense. The Defense Intelligence Agency is an example. And, of course, we have a national defense intelligence, a national intelligence director, which was insisted upon by the 9/11 Commission and the families of the victims. And so, you know, it seems now to me, Mr. Speaker, that we are kind of getting a little loosey-goosey about all this stuff and thinking, well, gosh, you know, the Speaker of the House said the CIA lies. You can't trust them. So maybe that's why we're so ready to cut missile defense. We don't believe the intelligence.
All the time she says they lied. It's not just this instance. Her statement was, oh, they lie to us all the time. Mr. King.
I thank the gentleman from Texas for yielding. And
all the time.
You've raised a scenario here that disturbs.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. And as much as we don't want to get off in the process, so everybody's clear, let's put it this way. If you're listening to what we're talking about here today and you would like for us to have this addressed by the members of this House, it takes the ability under the rules to raise the issue. And if we have what they call a closed rule or a modified closed rule where only certain agreed to amendments to a bill can come forward, we hate to talk about process, but that's how we are prevented from asking the questions that I would hope many people that might be watching this would say, somebody ought to ask the whole House about that. Do we need that missile defense Mr. Gingrey mentioned? I kind of think we do. I'd like my member of Congress to do something about that. Maybe they might even go to the trouble to write their member of Congress, say, I'd like to see you vote on this, vote in favor of it. But how are they going to see it if we're closed off from even offering it on this beloved floor, which, of course, is the sacred people's house? And that's why we think the rules ought to be open.
The gentleman would yield.
I yield.
On that point, and just briefly, that's exactly right. That people in these 435 congressional districts, Republican or Democrat, they need to know how their member would vote on an issue such as that. Something that's that important to this country in this time. They need an opportunity to hear that debate on this floor, you know, up or down. They need to know how their member votes. And the point the gentleman makes from Texas is absolutely on target. And I just wanted to emphasize that.
And I think everybody understands that these bills that come before this Congress have sometimes thousands. Well, you saw the one John Boehner dropped on the floor. It's about that thick. I mean, they got thousands of pages of things in them. So how you vote on a bill doesn't necessarily tell you what's in the weeds, like a couple of $1 million for missile defense or a couple of $1 billion for missile defense. Doesn't tell you that. And if it's not discussed, you don't know. And there's not any way we can tell you. That's why the openness of this House is so important. Why it's open, an open rule is so important. Mr. King, I yield to you.
Thank the gentleman from Texas, and I think I'm watching the clock tick down here. But and I'll just conclude in a couple of minutes. But as I said, I just came from the Rules Committee, and there's really not room in there for a tripod and a camera, and not really room for the press to operate the way they need to, and there's not room for staff to come and make sure they're there to run the errands that we need. And I know the gentleman from Georgia knows this very well. He served on the Rules Committee. It occurs to me that if the rules is where the debate's going to take place in this Congress, let's move the Rules Committee down to the floor, the House of Representatives, and let's elect the members of the Rules Committee from the full House. And let's make sure they're equally represented between Republicans and Democrats, and put the C-SPAN cameras on them and have an opportunity to have a full-throated debate on every amendment that would be offered to the Rules Committee, as if this were actually the full House, because they are functioning with the function of the House of Representatives in the Rules Committee. We've got to turn the sunlight on what's going on up there. Either that, or we're going to have to go back to the open rules process that has been the long-standing tradition here in the United States Congress. This is unprecedented to see the systematic destruction of deliberative democracy taking place up there on the third floor, out of sight of the public eye. And I yield back to the gentleman from Texas and thank him.
Well, we've raised a lot of issues. We've talked about a lot of things. I think we've expressed our personal concern about this issue of the the veracity of our CIA and whether or not they've been lying to the Congress and to the Speaker of the House, the third most powerful person and most important person in line for the presidency. These are issues, as the ethics issues we've raised previously, issues that have places they can be resolved either in the leadership of this House or as it pertains to ethics in the Ethics Committee. They need to be resolved, Madam Speaker. We need these issues resolved. And I would final this argument by saying, especially this intelligence issue, before the world blows up in our face. I want to thank my colleagues for being here with us and helping me with this today, and I really value their opinions, and I appreciate them expressing it. And now we'll yield back the balance of our time. We're not time for a moment, and
The gentleman from Texas yields back.